My name's James, or Jimmy Daly. I received lengthy sentences in both federal and state courts. I spent the first 27 years in federal custody. 24 of those years I spent in solitary confinement. Then I was transferred into the California Department of Corrections, where I am now serving 4 life sentences plus 31 years. I've now been incarcerated for 34 years. What I will read now is a brief part of my story. I grew up having all of the material advantages in life that most here in prison never had. And with those advantages, I should have gone on to live a good life, raising a beautiful family and having a successful career. But life isn't always what it may seem at first glance. Sometimes what goes on behind closed doors can change the way life could have been or should have been, and into that of the unexpected, that of a lonely life behind concrete walls, steel bars, and wearing prison blues. I grew up extremely hyperactive. I can only liken it to what a young child might be like on methamphetamine. It affected literally every aspect of my life. Heavily medicated for most of my childhood. At some level, drugs just became an acceptable way in which to handle my emotions, thus my addiction that followed. With my mind always racing and jumping from one thought to the next, always found it difficult to sit still for any length of time. Because of that, I always did poorly in school. Frustrated and embarrassed, I would act out so as to deflect from the pain I felt. As far back as I can remember, I always found it to be a struggle to get my father's attention. I desperately wanted a relationship with him, to feel his love. Yet it always seemed to be just out of reach for me, as if I could never quite get there. I remember as a child always asking myself, was I worthy of his love? There was always a part of me that recognized that I would never be that son to my father that he always hoped for. Regardless of what I did, I would always fall short. It would never be enough. The disappointment that I saw in his eyes would always be there. By the time I reached adolescence, my pain and frustration had turned to uncontrollable rage. My father and I no longer talked. I would act out and he would beat me. It just became an endless cycle that continued to escalate and in intensity, with things just getting further and further out of control. Had there been a gun in the household at the time, I can't help but wonder if I would have shot my father, or if my father would have shot me, as I am convinced that one of us would have picked up a gun. Violence became a big part of my life. It was neither right nor wrong. It was just the way things were. I was beat by my dad at home, and was always the most paddled student in every school I ever went to. Even when I attended Catholic school, the nuns certainly didn't believe in sparing the rod. When I became disruptive in class, a sister would have me come up to the front of the classroom, make me hold my hand out, then would hit me across the hand with a ruler. And when the infraction warranted it, I'd be made to bend over her desk, and she would swat me across my backside with a larger stick. At some point, violence eventually became an acceptable means in which to get what I wanted from others. I was in and out of prison in the 1980s. Back then, California Department of Corrections made no pretense of rehabilitation. It was just garbage in and garbage out. I became a product of the revolving door system that existed then, and came out each time more angry and more dangerous than I was before I went into prison. After completion of my federal term in 2017, I was transferred into the custody of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. What became apparent to me right away was the importance now being placed in rehabilitation, self-help groups, and education. This was no longer the old prison system that I left behind in the 80s. I now knew the means in which I would have to change the trajectory of my life were right here, All I needed to do was apply myself. Back to the start, Reflections Behind Bars gave me what so many of the other groups I had taken did not: the ability to examine my childhood trauma, and as a result, better understand my life's path from cradle to prison. Often it can be uncomfortable and painful to peel back the layers of your life, much like you would peel back the layers of an onion, to reveal the painful memories that you have hidden away in the dark recesses of your mind in hopes of forgetting them. What eventually becomes clear is how our childhood trauma influences who we are, how we view the world around us, and our decision-making processes. And with that better understanding comes healing and the ability to change your life and to begin living a more productive and empathetic life. To be clear, nothing I've said here is meant to excuse my actions in the past or to blame others. I and I alone am responsible for the poor decisions I've repeatedly made that has led me to spending most of my adult life behind bars. That said, childhood trauma as well as other contributing factors has some effect on who we are today and how we reach our decisions. Thank you all for caring enough to come.